The night the staircase first appeared, the air itself seemed to bleed. Moonlight fractured against the ancient boarding school's windows, spilling crimson shadows across the walls. Evelyn Harper stood at the threshold, her breath fogging in the cold, the sound of distant laughter echoing through the deserted halls. It wasn't playful, it was hollow, hungry, as if the building itself were remembering something it should have forgotten. The old legends whispered of steps that rose only after midnight, glowing like blood and leading nowhere mortal. Evelyn told herself it was only a story, but the darkness was waiting, and it knew her name. The sun was a fading ember in the sky as I stood before the towering iron gates of the boarding school. The structure loomed like a relic from another era, its Gothic spires clawing at the bruised clouds overhead. My suitcase felt impossibly heavy in my hand, though the weight was nothing compared to the knot tightening in my chest. This place was supposed to be my refuge, a chance to escape the fractured chaos of my family life. Yet standing here, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stepped into something far older and darker than I'd imagined. The grounds were eerily silent, save for the crunch of gravel beneath my worn boots. I inhaled deeply, the cold air sharp and biting, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and ancient wood. A few students lingered near the entrance, their faces pale and guarded as they stole glances my way. I recognized none of them, but I imagined their thoughts. Newcomer, outsider, someone who would soon learn the rules whispered in shadows and half-truths. Inside the great hall, the atmosphere thickened. Candle chandeliers flickered against stone walls draped in faded tapestries. The murmur of voices ebbed and flowed like a restless tide. I found a vacant seat at the long dining table, my fingers tightening around the edge as snippets of conversation brushed against me. "You heard about the staircase?" A whisper reached my ears, barely audible but charged with a strange urgency. "Only comes out after midnight," another voice replied, low and wary. "Those who climb it, they don't come back." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. It sounded like a ghost story, a cruel joke to scare freshmen into obedience. Yet the tremble in their voices suggested something more, an unspoken dread lurking beneath the surface. Over the next few days, the school settled into a rhythm both familiar and unsettling. Lessons marched on, but beneath the routine, a current of unease pulsed. I learned the names of a few classmates, Marcus Hale, tall and skeptical, with sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything with quiet suspicion. Lila Chen, rebellious and fierce, her gaze burning with a restless defiance. They both intrigued and unsettled me in equal measure. One evening, as the clock in the hall tower chimed the hour of midnight, I lay awake in my dormitory. The shadows around me deepened, the silence broken only by a faint, distant sound, laughter. It was light, almost playful, yet carried an echo of something hollow and lost. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to catch the source. The halls were empty, or so I told myself, but the laughter lingered, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. The next night, I found myself drawn toward the staircase at the far end of the west corridor. It was barely visible in the muted moonlight, its steps cloaked in a shimmering crimson hue that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I paused, breath shallow, feeling the weight of countless unseen eyes. A shadow flickered near the staircase, just a glimpse, but it was enough to ignite a fire of questions within me. Later, I met Mr. Whitaker, the caretaker, a man whose face was creased with lines that spoke of countless secrets. His eyes held a warning I couldn't ignore as he muttered of dangers best left alone. Yet his words only deepened my resolve. If this staircase was real, if it held the key to the strange disappearances whispered about in the halls, I needed to know. That night, as the clock struck midnight once more, I sat by my window, staring out at the darkness beyond. The crimson glow seemed to beckon, its promise both terrifying and irresistible. I was no longer just a newcomer. I was a seeker, caught between the fragile hope of understanding and the encroaching shadow of dread. The staircase was waiting, and so was the darkness. The story of the Crimson Staircase had only just begun to unravel, and I was already entangled in its haunting embrace. What secrets hid behind those blood-red steps? What fate awaited those who dared to climb? Each whispered rumor was a thread pulling me deeper into a nightmare I was determined to face, no matter the cost. As I closed my journal that night, a single thought echoed. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. The night settled over the ancient boarding school like a dense, suffocating shroud, cloaking every hallway in shadows that seemed to breathe with a quiet, sinister life. I sat alone in the common room, the flickering candlelight casting elongated, dancing shapes across the worn wooden walls. Outside, the wind whispered secrets through the swaying branches of the towering trees, their skeletal limbs scratching against the stone windows like ghostly fingers. My eyes were fixed on the clock above the fireplace, its hands creeping inexorably toward midnight. There was a peculiar dread in the air tonight, a shift, subtle yet undeniable, that whispered promises of revelations and threats alike. The rumors I had heard on my first day clawed at the edges of my mind, refusing to let me find peace. The Crimson Staircase, the whispered legend that surfaced only under the shroud of night, between the fragile hours when the world seemed to hold its breath, was no longer just a story told in hushed voices. It was becoming a tangible presence in my life, an obsession that gnawed relentlessly at my curiosity and sanity. As the clock struck 12, a distant laughter trickled through the corridors, a sound both childlike and chillingly hollow. It echoed from somewhere unreachable, bouncing off the stone walls and seeping into my bones. The laughter was not joyful. It was a haunting melody of innocence lost, of joy twisted into despair. I shivered despite the warmth of the room, my heart pounding in sudden, frantic rhythm. Unable to resist, I rose and crept toward the hallway, the candle sputtering in my trembling hand. The corridor stretched before me, a tunnel swallowed by darkness, yet as I stepped forward, the shadows began to shift. From the depths of the gloom, a faint crimson glow began to pulse, faint at first, then brighter and more insistent. My breath caught in my throat as the Crimson Staircase emerged, a spectral structure of impossible beauty and terrible menace. Its steps seemed carved from blood itself, the color shifting and swirling like living flame. I reached out hesitantly, my fingers tingling with a cold fire as if the staircase was alive, breathing, waiting. A sudden noise behind me made me whirl around. Marcus stood there, eyes wide with disbelief and concern. "Evelyn," he said, voice low and urgent, this isn't real. You can't let it consume you." I wanted to argue, to tell him that what I saw was as real as the beating of my heart, but the words caught in my throat. His skepticism was a tether to sanity I wasn't sure I could hold on to. Yet, the staircase beckoned, its deep red steps promising answers and horrors alike. Before I could respond, a shadow darted past us, a slender figure with sharp eyes and a defiant stance. Lila Chen, always the rebel, was slipping away toward the forbidden wing, her silhouette swallowed by darkness. Her reckless curiosity was a spark that threatened to ignite the fragile balance we clung to. That night, as I lay awake in my cold dormitory bed, the laughter echoed again, mingling with the beating of my own heart. The Crimson Staircase was no longer just a legend. It was a secret waiting to be unraveled, a nightmare dressed in the guise of a dream. And I was caught between fascination and fear, drawn deeper into the abyss with every passing moment. The midnight secrets of the school had begun to unravel, and I was powerless to turn away. Questions swirled like mist. What was the staircase's purpose? Why did it appear only after midnight? And what terrible fate awaited those who dared to climb it? My hands trembled as I reached for my journal, the only refuge where I could try to make sense of the growing darkness. The night stretched before me, endless and merciless, and I knew that once the Crimson Staircase appeared, nothing would ever be the same again. But even as dread settled in my chest, a small, fragile flame of resolve flickered within me. I would uncover the truth. I had to, for the sake of those lost, for the echoing laughter, and for the shadows that threatened to consume us all. The school's nocturnal rhythm was no longer a mystery, it was a summons, and I was answering. As the final seconds of midnight slipped away, I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting. The Crimson Staircase pulsed softly in the darkness, a siren call drowning out reason. My journey had only just begun, and the night was far from over. The air in the dormitory that night was unusually still, as if the very walls of the ancient boarding school were holding their breath. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, the worn quilt barely keeping the chill at bay. Across the room, Nina Brooks, my classmate, and one of the few people I dared to trust since arriving, shifted uneasily beneath her covers. Her eyes were wide and alert, reflecting the dim glow of the lantern we kept on the shared nightstand, a small rebellion against the darkness that seemed to seep into every corner since the rumors began. "You don't really believe those stories, do you?" Nina whispered, her voice barely audible over the creaking of the old wooden beams above us. I hesitated. The stories about the Crimson Staircase had been circulating since the first night I arrived, whispered behind closed doors and in hushed tones between frightened students. The staircase that appeared only after midnight, glowing with a sinister red hue, a stairway to nowhere, or worse, to oblivion. "I don't know what to believe," I admitted, my fingers tightening around the journal I'd started keeping. "But I can't ignore what's happening." Outside, the clock in the main hall began its slow, inevitable chime toward midnight. Each toll seemed to echo through the hollow corridors, marking the time until the staircase would materialize again. The promise of silence shattered by a faint, distant sound, laughter, high-pitched and eerie, drifting through the shadows like a ghostly melody. "Did you hear that?" Nina's breath hitched, and I nodded, the hairs on my arms standing on end. The laughter was unmistakable, the same haunting echo we'd heard since the first night, always at dawn. It was said to be the laughter of those who had climbed the staircase and never returned. My heart pounded as we crept toward the window, peering out into the blackness beyond the school grounds. The moon hung low, casting a pale light that did little to pierce the darkness. And then, there it was, the staircase. Emerging slowly, step by step, from the depths of the shadowed hallway beneath the grand staircase in the main hall. Its crimson glow was otherworldly, pulsing softly like a heartbeat, inviting and terrifying all at once. I watched as Nina's eyes locked onto the apparition, a mixture of fear and fascination playing across her delicate features. "I have to see," she whispered, almost to herself, before turning away and pulling on her coat. "Nina, wait," I caught up to her in the hall, the cold air biting through my thin sweater. "It's not safe. We don't know what it is." She smiled, a sad, defiant curve of her lips. "I have to know the truth, Evelyn. If I don't, I'll never stop wondering." Before I could stop her, Nina stepped toward the glowing steps. The air around her seemed to shimmer, the silence deepening as the staircase beckoned. She took the first step, then another, her figure becoming swallowed by the crimson light. A sudden gust of icy wind swept through the hall, extinguishing the lantern and plunging me into darkness. I reached out, but there was nothing, only the echo of Nina's laughter, growing fainter with each passing second. I stood frozen, the shock rooting me to the spot. When the light from the staircase faded, so did Nina. No trace remained, no sign that she had ever been there, but the lingering, chilling sound of her laughter. Morning found the school in a state of uneasy silence. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed Nina had run away, others whispered darker fates. The faculty offered vague reassurances, dismissing the disappearances as accidents or pranks gone wrong. But the truth was undeniable. The staircase was real, and it was deadly. Marcus Hale found me in the library later that day, his usual skeptical expression softened by concern. "I don't like this," he said quietly. "Whatever this staircase is, it's more than just a story." I nodded, clutching my journal tighter. The laughter haunted my dreams, a cruel reminder of what was lost and what awaited anyone who dared to climb those blood-stained steps. With Nina gone, the fragile veil of safety was torn away. I knew I couldn't turn back, not now. The staircase was a puzzle demanding to be solved, a darkness that had to be faced, and I was the only one who could do it. As night fell again, the crimson glow began to seep through the shadows. The staircase waited, patient and unyielding. And so did I, caught between fear and fascination, standing on the edge of a nightmare I could no longer ignore. The first disappearance had shattered the fragile peace within these ancient walls, but it was only the beginning. The library was quiet, save for the occasional creak of ancient floorboards and the soft rustling of pages. Evelyn's footsteps echoed lightly as she made her way between towering shelves, the dim glow of a single lamp casting long shadows that seemed to dance with every flicker. Her heart thrummed with a mixture of apprehension and determination. Here, away from the prying eyes of other students, she hoped to find an ally. Marcus Hale was seated at a heavy oak table, head bent over a thick volume, his brow furrowed in concentration. Seeing her approach, he looked up, his sharp eyes meeting hers with an inquisitive glint. "Marcus," Evelyn began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to talk to you about the staircase." He raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident. "The staircase, you're serious about that?" Evelyn nodded, clutching her journal tightly. "It's real, and it's dangerous. Nina's gone. I heard her laughter this morning, but she's not here. Something's wrong." "I can feel it." Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms. "You know I'm not one for ghost stories, Evelyn, but if you're this worried, I'll listen." Relief washed over her. "Thank you. I don't know what's happening, but I can't ignore it anymore." Their conversation stretched into the night, shadows growing longer as they pieced together rumors and sightings. Marcus's pragmatic nature clashed with Evelyn's growing fear, but a bond formed, a fragile alliance fueled by shared unease. Later, as they left the library, they encountered Leela Chen in the common room. Her presence was electric, bold, and unyielding. With a defiant glare, she challenged their cautious approach. "You're all too afraid. The staircase is the truth, and hiding from it won't help." Evelyn felt a swell of frustration. Leela's recklessness was as much a threat as the staircase itself. Yet, beneath the bravado, Evelyn sensed a kindred spirit, someone drawn by the same dark allure. The three stood by a window overlooking the school grounds, the first faint glow of the crimson staircase barely visible in the distance. The air was thick with dread and fascination, a silent promise of the trials to come. "We need to be careful," Marcus warned, his voice low. "This isn't just a game." Evelyn nodded, determination hardening within her. "We have to find out what's behind it, before more of us disappear." As the night deepened, the uneasy trio prepared to face the shadows lurking within the school's ancient walls, their fates intertwined with the enigmatic crimson staircase. The evening cast long shadows across the school's ancient library, where rows of books and archives lay untouched by time. Evelyn Harper's fingers brushed over the cold spines of forgotten records, heart hammering with a mixture of dread and hope. The air was thick with dust and silence, punctuated only by the faint scraping sound of her nails against leather-bound volumes. She had convinced Marcus Hale to join her in this clandestine search, their shared unease forging a fragile alliance. Marcus, ever the skeptic, had reluctantly agreed, the rational part of his mind battling the mounting evidence of the supernatural. "Look here," Evelyn whispered, her breath catching as she pulled a worn, leather-bound journal from the depths of a high shelf. The book was heavy, its cover cracked and stained, the scent of aged paper rising in the cool air like a ghost from the past. Marcus leaned over her shoulder, eyes narrowing as he took in the faded gold lettering that spelled out a name, one none of the current students would recognize. They settled at a small wooden table beneath a flickering lamp, the dim light casting eerie patterns on the cracked walls. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she opened the journal, revealing pages filled with tightly packed handwriting, ink faded to a ghostly gray. The entries began innocuously enough, notes about school life, friendships, and mundane worries, but soon took a darker turn. Descriptions of strange noises in the night, glimpses of a glowing red staircase that appeared only after midnight, and a growing obsession with the spectral structure that seemed to beckon the writer deeper into its shadow. As Evelyn read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper, Marcus's skepticism wavered. The words painted a vivid picture of fear and isolation. The writer, a student who had vanished years ago under mysterious circumstances, chronicled encounters with a presence that seemed alive, an entity feeding on innocence and despair. The journal spoke of laughter echoing through empty halls, the same haunting sound Evelyn had come to dread. A particularly chilling entry described the writer's final night, standing before the crimson staircase, feeling an irresistible pull. The page ended abruptly, the ink smeared as if by trembling hands or tears. Evelyn's eyes darted to Marcus, searching for any sign of disbelief, but found only a grim seriousness that matched her own. This changes everything," Marcus muttered, running a hand through his hair. "We can't just dismiss it as folklore anymore." Their discovery deepened the mystery, revealing a legacy of silence and sorrow that had been carefully concealed by the school's authorities. It was clear the staircase was more than a haunting. It was a trap, a malevolent force that had claimed countless victims over the decades. But why and how remained obscured in layers of fear and forgotten pain. Determined to piece together the puzzle, Evelyn resolved to seek out more records, to understand the entity's nature, and find a way to protect those still caught in its grip. Yet the more she uncovered, the heavier the weight of the school's cursed past felt pressing down on her shoulders. Each revelation was a thread pulling her deeper into the crimson abyss. As they closed the journal, the distant echo of laughter floated faintly through the corridors outside, chilling them to the bone. The staircase was waiting, and with every secret unveiled, its grip tightened. Evelyn's resolve hardened, but the shadows around her whispered warnings she could no longer ignore. "We have to be ready," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the darkened hallway where the staircase would soon appear. "Because whatever's waiting up there, it's not done with us yet." The chapter ends with a heavy silence, the promise of uncovering more truths shadowed by the creeping dread of what lies beyond the crimson stairs. The shadows in my dorm room seemed to breathe with the flicker of the candle's flame, casting elongated shapes on the cracked walls that whispered secrets only the night could hold. I lay on my narrow bed, the thin blanket pulled up to my chin, but the chill that gnawed at my skin was not from the cold. It was something deeper, a sensation that settled under my ribs and refused to be soothed. As the clock hands crept past midnight, the world beyond my window slipped into a strange stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves against the ancient stone walls of the school. Sleep, when it finally came, did not offer the solace I had hoped for. Instead, it dragged me into a realm where memory and nightmare intertwined, each thread dyed in the unmistakable hue of crimson. I found myself standing in the ruins of my childhood home, but it was not as I remembered it. The walls bled a deep red, as if the very foundation was soaked in sorrow. The air was thick with the scent of iron and damp earth, and somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed, a laughter both joyous and sinister. It was a sound I recognized, yet feared. It belonged to children, yet it carried a weight that no innocent mirth should bear. The crimson mist curled around my ankles, climbing higher with every hesitant step. I reached out, fingers brushing the vapor, cold and wet like morning dew, yet it left a stain, a vivid mark upon my skin that refused to fade. Memories flickered like broken film reels. The day my mother left, the silence that followed, the hollow ache of loneliness. But they were fragmented, twisted by the nightmare's hand, morphing into images of the staircase. The staircase that appeared only after midnight, pulsing with a life of its own. Suddenly, the scene shifted. I was no longer in the ruins, but in the school's playground, though it was warped beyond recognition. The swings swayed in a windless void, creaking softly like mournful voices. Crimson petals drifted down like rain, carpeting the ground in a blood-red blanket. Each petal whispered secrets, fragments of forgotten stories, and lost laughter that seemed to seep from the soil itself. I felt a presence behind me, a child, spectral and pale, her eyes glowing faintly with a crimson light that matched the petals. She beckoned silently, a finger pressed to her lips in a gesture of secrecy. Her gaze was both a mirror and a warning, reflecting my own fears and the innocence I had lost. Together, we approached a darkened hallway where the staircase awaited. Its steps throbbed like a heartbeat, each pulse resonating with a sinister rhythm that called to something deep within me. I wanted to turn away, to flee back to the safety of the waking world, but I was rooted in place. The child's eyes bore into mine, and in them, I saw the reflection of my own haunted past and the terrible inevitability of what lay ahead. The staircase was not just a structure. It was a gateway, a manifestation of all the pain, fear, and shattered dreams that had been buried beneath the school's ancient stones. I woke with a start, the echo of laughter still ringing in my ears, a sound both comforting and cruel. My chest heaved as I struggled to draw air, the weight of guilt pressing down like a stone. I thought of Nina, of Leela, of the others who had vanished, swallowed by the crimson abyss. Was I next? Or could I find a way to break the cycle that bound us all? The dawn's pale light spilled through the cracked window, casting long fingers of gold across the floor. For a moment, the nightmare retreated, but I knew it was only a reprieve. The staircase would return, and with it, the shadows of my childhood, darker, deeper, and more dangerous than ever before. I reached for my journal, my trembling hand tracing the familiar lines of ink and paper. Writing was my anchor, the fragile thread that kept me tethered to reality. As I put pen to paper, I vowed to confront the darkness, to unravel the secrets woven into the red-tinged fabric of my dreams. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the path was fraught with terror, but I would not turn away. Not this time, because to face the crimson staircase was to face myself, my fears, my memories, and the fragile flame of hope that still flickered in the depths of my soul. The corridor felt colder than usual as I made my way toward the boiler room. The soft scrape of my shoes against the worn floorboards swallowed by the oppressive silence that seemed to seep from the very walls. The dim glow of the single bulb overhead flickered sporadically, casting grotesque shadows that danced just beyond the edges of my vision. I had heard whispers that Mr. Whittaker might be found here during the late hours, and despite the gnawing uncertainty twisting in my gut, I needed answers. I paused at the edge of the iron door, hand hovering hesitantly above the cold handle. The faint smell of rust and damp wood spilled out, mingled with an undercurrent of something older, something decayed. Finally, summoning what little courage I had left, I pushed the door open with a creak that echoed down the empty hall. There, seated on a battered wooden bench, was Mr. Whittaker. His gaunt figure hunched beneath the dim light, the gray strands of his hair barely catching the faint glow, his eyes shadowed and distant. "You're up late," he said without turning, his voice low and gravelly. I need to ask you about the staircase," I confessed, stepping inside, the door closing behind me with a thud that seemed to seal us in a world apart. He sighed, the sound heavy with years of unspoken burdens. "It's not a subject I take lightly," he murmured. "That staircase has been here longer than any of us care to remember. It comes for the curious, the unwary, the broken, and it never lets go without a price." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling like a stone in my chest. "Why, what does it want?" His eyes finally met mine, flickering with a sorrow that seemed to stretch across decades. "Innocence," he said simply. "It feeds on it, traps it. Every laughter that echoes at dawn, it's not just a memory. It's a fragment of a soul it never returned." The room seemed to grow colder still, the shadows lengthening until they swallowed the edges of the bench where he sat. "I've tried to keep students away," he admitted, voice dropping to a whisper. "But the staircase, it calls. It's a siren song few can resist." As I listened, a sudden rustle caught my attention. Mr. Whittaker reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small, rusted key, its metal dull but unmistakably cold. He pressed it into my palm, his fingers lingering for a moment, trembling slightly. "If you go near that staircase," he warned, "remember it doesn't just take you up. It takes pieces of your soul." The weight of the key was heavy and cold against my skin, a tangible reminder of the darkness lurking just beyond the edge of understanding. I nodded, unable to voice the torrent of questions swirling in my mind. "Be careful, Evelyn," he said, his voice cracking like old wood. "Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again." I left the boiler room with the key burning a hole in my pocket and a chill trailing down my spine. The halls outside were silent, but beneath the stillness, I could almost hear the faint echo of laughter, haunting, distant, and unmistakably crimson. The midnight chimes began to toll, each strike a reminder that the staircase would soon appear. And with it, the nightmare would deepen. Despite the dread curling in my stomach, a fierce spark of determination ignited within me. If the staircase was a trap, if it fed on stolen innocence and shattered souls, then I would be the one to end it. I would face whatever darkness lay at the top of those blood-red steps, even if it meant losing parts of myself in the process. As I walked back toward my dormitory, the key felt heavier still, as if it carried not just metal, but the weight of countless forgotten stories, silent screams, and the fragile remnants of childhoods lost to the shadows. The night had only just begun, and the cursed heart of the boarding school was waiting, and so was I. The corridors of the ancient boarding school seemed to breathe with a restless life after twilight. On this particular night, the air was thick with unease, an almost tangible tension that clung to the cracked plaster and faded tapestries like a second skin. I moved cautiously, my footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Around me, the dim lights flickered erratically, casting wavering pools of pale illumination that seemed insufficient to hold back the encroaching darkness. I wasn't alone in feeling the change. The chill that settled over the school was not merely the cold of late autumn, but something far more sinister, and it gnawed at the edges of my resolve. As I rounded a corner near the east wing, a faint murmur brushed past my ear, a whisper, barely audible yet unmistakable. I froze. The voice carried a strange cadence, a breathy susurration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Evelyn," I whipped my head around, heart hammering, but the corridor was empty. The shadows pooled like ink in the corners, and the flickering light above cast long, trembling figures that seemed to move with a life of their own. My breath came shallow and quick, the echo of that whispered name lingering in my mind. Later, I found Marcus sitting alone in the library's dimmest nook, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. The skeptical veneer he usually wore was cracked. The weight of recent events had begun to erode his disbelief. "Marcus," I whispered, approaching cautiously. "What's wrong?" He glanced at me, his sharp eyes shadowed with something new unease. "I saw it," he admitted in a low voice. "A shadow, it moved independently. It whispered my name. I thought it was my imagination, but it wasn't." I swallowed hard, feeling the cold grip of dread tighten. If Marcus was shaken, then the truth could no longer be denied. The crimson staircase was more than a phantom. It was a conduit for something malevolent, something that fed on fear. Our uneasy alliance was tested that evening by Leela's restless energy. She stormed into our meeting spot, eyes blazing with defiant fire. "We can't just sit here and wait for the next disappearance," she snapped. "This," she gestured vaguely toward the dark windows where the night pressed close like a shroud, "this thing wants us to be afraid. But fear is weakness. We fight by facing it head-on." Her words were a spark in the dark, igniting a flame of reckless hope. Marcus shook his head, wary. "Leela, rushing in without a plan will only get us killed," she scoffed. "Better to die trying than to disappear without a trace." The tension between her and Marcus crackled in the stale air, and I found myself caught in the middle, torn between caution and the desperate urge to act. That night, as the clock edged toward midnight, I wandered the shadowed halls once more. The whispers grew louder, threading through the silence like venom. Suddenly, from the darkness ahead, emerged Mr. Whittaker. His gaunt face was etched with lines deeper than I'd noticed before, his eyes dull but intense. "You're treading a dangerous path, Evelyn," he said quietly, his voice gravelly. "Some knowledge comes at too high a cost. There are wounds in this place that have never healed, and some shadows never truly dissipate." I searched his face for more, but he turned and vanished into the gloom as silently as he had appeared. His warning settled over me like a shroud, heavy with the weight of unspoken histories. The nights grew darker, the shadows longer and more ominous. Marcus no longer dismissed the whispers. Leela's defiance drove us closer to the edge. And I, caught between fear and fascination, felt the invisible pull of the crimson staircase growing stronger. Each flicker of light, each passing shadow, seemed to beckon me toward a fate I could neither resist nor fully understand. As dawn approached, the echo of laughter twisted through the halls, a chilling reminder of those who had climbed and vanished before us. I clutched my journal tighter, the pages filling with hurried notes and trembling sketches. The shadows were watching, waiting, and soon I would have to face them. The question that haunted me was no longer if the staircase was real, but what awaited those who dared to ascend it, and whether we could survive the night that was closing in around us. The school had become a labyrinth of shadows and suspicions, and I was trapped within its dark heart, racing against time and terror to uncover a truth that might save us all or doom us forever. The crescendo of unease was palpable as the whispers turned into voices and the shadows began to stretch with sinister intent. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the chill of breath on my neck, the cold touch of fear that crept beneath my skin. The school was no longer just a building, it was a living nightmare, and we were its prey. But amidst the darkness, a fragile spark of resolve flickered within me. I would not let the crimson staircase claim another soul without a fight. And so, with the first light of dawn still hours away, I prepared to delve deeper into the abyss, knowing that tonight, the shadows would reveal their true face. The hour had slipped past midnight, and an uneasy hush had settled over the boarding school's shadowed halls. The air seemed heavier, thick with a mixture of anticipation and dread that prickled at my skin. Marcus and I had just finished reviewing the fragments of the journal I'd found, the ink smeared with time and sorrow, when a sudden noise drew our attention to the corridor outside the library. "Leela," Marcus muttered, his voice tight with unease. "She's out there again." I peered through the narrow window of the library door and caught sight of her slender figure pacing near the old staircase alcove. The crimson glow was already beginning to seep from the wall, like blood oozing from a wound. Despite the warnings we'd exchanged, the allure of the staircase had drawn her like a moth to flame. "She shouldn't be out here," I whispered, heart pounding. "We told her it's dangerous." Marcus ran a hand through his short-cropped hair, frustration etched across his sharp features. "She's reckless, but maybe she's trying to prove something to herself or to the rest of us." I swallowed hard and stepped out into the corridor, the floorboards creaking underfoot. The crimson staircase had fully materialized now, its steps glowing with an unnatural light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. Leela stood at its base, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, eyes fixed upward with a fierce determination that chilled me. "Leela, please," I called out, trying to steady my voice. "Don't do this. You don't know what's up there." She turned to me, her piercing eyes reflecting the staircase's eerie glow. "I have to," she said simply, voice steady, but layered with something raw and vulnerable. "If I don't face this, I'll never be free of the fear." Marcus stepped forward, his tone firm but pleading. "We can figure this out together. We don't need to risk it like this." But Leela shook her head, a rebellious spark igniting within her. "You don't understand. This is my fight." Before I could protest again, she placed her foot on the first glowing step. The crimson light seemed to ripple beneath her weight, as if responding to her resolve. I felt a cold wave wash over me, an instinctual warning that I couldn't ignore. "Leela, wait," I cried, but it was too late. She ascended, each step silent but heavy with portent. Marcus and I exchanged a helpless glance as the staircase seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness above. Then, without warning, the faint echo of her footsteps ceased. A silence heavier than the night itself engulfed the corridor. "She's gone," Marcus breathed, disbelief and fear mingling in his voice. I nodded numbly, the dread settling deep within my chest. The staircase pulsed once more, a soft, sinister glow that seemed to mock our helplessness. Suddenly, the heavy footsteps of Mr. Whittaker echoed from the far end of the hall. The caretaker appeared, his weathered face grim and eyes shadowed with knowledge that weighed upon him like a shroud. "I warned her," he said quietly, voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and urgency. "That staircase, it takes more than just those who climb it. It feeds on their fears, their innocence." I looked at him, desperation clawing at my throat. "How do we stop it? How do we save her?" He shook his head slowly. "There's no simple answer, but you too, you have a chance. You must confront what lies beyond." The distant echo of laughter drifted down the hallway, chilling and hollow, carrying a weight that made my blood run cold. It was Leela's laughter, or was it? The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I knew then that nothing would ever be the same. Marcus grabbed my hand, his grip steady despite the terror in his eyes. "We face it together," he vowed. I nodded, steeling myself against the encroaching darkness. The crimson staircase awaited, a gateway to a nightmare I could no longer avoid. As the laughter faded into silence, I realized that the true horror was only beginning. Together, we would have to climb or be consumed by the shadows that had claimed our friend. The night was far from over. The corridor's dim light flickered as we approached the staircase's base, the crimson steps glowing with an eerie vitality. I could feel the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides, broken only by the faintest hum of the entity's presence. Marcus's breath was shallow beside me, but his resolve was unwavering. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed my fear, nodding with determination. For Leela, for all of us. The first step was cold beneath my foot, but the crimson glow seemed to pulse with warmth, deceptive and inviting. As I ascended, the world around me shifted. The familiar walls of the school melted away into swirling shadows and twisting shapes. The oppressive darkness wrapped around me like a suffocating shroud, but I forced my gaze upward, chasing the faint glimmers of light that promised a way forward. Behind me, I heard Marcus climbing, his footsteps steady and sure despite the surreal landscape. Together, we would face the malevolent force that had ensnared Leela and countless others before her. The staircase was no longer just a mystery, it was a battleground. My heart hammered in my chest as a distorted childlike silhouette flickered at the edge of my vision, its blood-red eyes glowing with hunger. The crimson entity had revealed itself, and there was no turning back. The air grew thick with memories twisted and tangled, the shadows whispering secrets too terrible to voice. Leela's disappearance was no longer just a tragedy, it was a summons. The staircase had claimed another, and we were next in its deadly game. The haunting echo of her laughter lingered, a cruel reminder that the line between childhood wonder and nightmare was thinner than I ever dared imagine. I clutched Marcus's hand tighter, drawing strength from his presence as we prepared to descend further into the abyss. The fight for our souls had begun, and the crimson nightmare was far from over. The library was a cavern of shadows and dust, a sanctuary for forgotten stories and whispered secrets. Evelyn's footsteps echoed softly against the cold stone floor as she followed Marcus deeper into the labyrinthine stacks. The air was thick with the musk of aged paper, a scent that seemed to seep into her skin, binding her ever tighter to the mysteries she sought to unravel. "Look at this," Marcus murmured, his voice a cautious whisper that barely disturbed the heavy silence. He held a brittle folder, its edges yellowed and fragile, the ink on its label faded to near illegibility. Records of disappearances stretching back decades. Evelyn's heart quickened. She took the folder carefully, as if it might crumble beneath her touch. The pages crackled softly as she turned them, revealing names, dates, and brief, unsettling notes, each entry a ghostly echo of a student swallowed by the boarding school's dark history. Their investigation had begun as a tentative probing, fueled by rumors and fear. But now, each document seemed to pulse with a sinister life of its own, weaving a tapestry of loss and silence across the decades. Evelyn traced a trembling finger down one page, noting the pattern, disappearances clustered around certain years, always accompanied by strange annotations, symbols she couldn't decipher, references to the crimson stairway, and cryptic mentions of the entity. "This is more than coincidence," she said, voice low and urgent. "There's a pattern here, Marcus. A design." Marcus nodded, brows furrowed in thought. "But why would the school keep this hidden?" Before Evelyn could answer, a quiet shuffle approached from behind. Mr. Whittaker emerged from the shadows, his face etched with lines carved by time and secrets. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, bore into them with a weight that made Evelyn shiver. "Digging where you shouldn't," he said gravely. "This place has bones buried beneath its foundations, stories best left untold." Evelyn met his gaze undeterred. "I have to know, for Nina, for all of them," he sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "Then know this. The staircase is no mere legend. It's a wound in the school's soul, fed by pain and innocence lost. The entity thrives on those who climb, trapping them in a cycle that's older than any of you realize. His words hung heavy in the air as Evelyn turned back to the documents. Hours passed, the light outside fading into a bruised twilight, yet she and Marcus remained ensnared in the records. They uncovered letters from long-gone staff, reports suppressed or altered, and photographs of students whose eyes seemed to plead for release. One ledger bound in cracked leather caught Evelyn's attention. Its pages were filled with names and dates, but at the margins, scribbled in a shaky hand, were symbols that matched those in the folder. As she studied them, a cold dread settled in her stomach. Each name was a thread in a tapestry of suffering, each date a marker of a night when the crimson staircase had claimed another soul. The room seemed to grow colder, shadows deepening as if the past itself pressed inward. A whisper brushed against her ear, a faint echo of laughter, brittle and hollow. Evelyn's breath caught, her pulse hammering in her ears. "We're not alone here," Marcus whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. She swallowed her fear, steeling herself against the encroaching darkness. "We have to keep going. The truth is here, hidden beneath layers of silence. And if we don't find it, no one will." As they gathered the documents, a sudden thud echoed from the stacks behind them. They spun around, hearts pounding, but saw nothing but shifting shadows. The weight of the school's history pressed down upon them, a suffocating reminder that some secrets were guarded jealously, by memories, by fear, and by the entity that lurked in the crimson shadows. Evelyn closed the ledger, her hands trembling. The path ahead was darker than ever, but now she held a key, a glimpse into the nightmare's origin. The boarding school was more than a place of learning. It was a mausoleum of lost childhoods, a nexus where innocence was devoured to fuel a malevolent hunger. Outside, the first hints of night crept through the stained glass windows, casting shards of crimson light across the floor. The staircase would soon appear again, its spectral steps beckoning. And Evelyn knew she was closer than ever to the truth. But with knowledge came danger. The entity was awakening, and it would not let her go without a fight. The past was unearthing itself, and the boarding school's darkest secret was ready to consume them all. "We have to prepare," Marcus said quietly, breaking the heavy silence. Evelyn nodded, her resolve hardening like forged steel. "Tomorrow, we confront the nightmare." As they left the library, the whispering shadows followed, a chilling reminder that in this place, the dead never truly rest. And neither would they. The moment I stepped toward the crimson staircase, a thick silence enveloped me, broken only by the soft, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to emanate from the very stones beneath my feet. The staircase was alive, pulsing with a sinister rhythm, as if it were breathing, its blood-red steps shimmering with an unnatural light that twisted and contorted, refusing to stay still. Shadows slithered around the edges, forming shapes that teased the edges of my vision, disappearing whenever I dared to look directly. I hesitated, the weight of every whispered rumor, every vanished student, pressing down on me like a physical force. But beneath the dread, an inexplicable pull urged me forward. The air grew thick with a scent I couldn't place, something faintly metallic, mingled with the stale odor of forgotten childhood toys and faded memories. The haunting melody floated through the air, low and mournful, a lullaby sung by unseen voices that resonated in my chest and unsettled my breath. As I ascended, the world around me began to shift. The familiar stone walls of the school dissolved into something fluid and dreamlike. Corridors stretched and warped, bathed in the same crimson light that bled from the staircase. The floor beneath my feet seemed to ripple like water, each step sinking into a soft, yielding surface that whispered promises of forgotten joys and unspeakable horrors. Whispers echoed in the distance, soft, childish laughter that morphed swiftly into cries and sighs. I recognized some of the voices. They were the echoes of those who had vanished before me. Their presence was both a warning and a temptation, a reminder of the cost and a lure into the unknown. The walls bled faintly, as if the structure itself was alive, suffering. Faces flickered in the crimson stains, twisted, fleeting images of children frozen in moments of fear and pain. The air was thick with memories, not just mine, but those of countless others who had been drawn here and lost to the darkness. Then, from the shadows, the crimson entity emerged. It was terrifying and mesmerizing all at once. Its form was ever-shifting, a mass of blood-red shadows that flickered between a grotesque, monstrous shape and a fragile, distorted, childlike silhouette. Its eyes, if such a thing could be said to have eyes, glowed with a hunger that reached deep into my soul. It reached out to me with tendrils of mist, soft and yet cold as death, brushing against my skin and stirring something deep inside, a mixture of terror and an inexplicable longing. It whispered promises of safety, of belonging, of a place where pain could be forgotten and nightmares would fade. But beneath the seductive words lurked a threat, a trap woven from fear and despair. I felt my resolve waver as the entity began to unravel my memories, pulling at the threads of my childhood. Scenes played out before me, moments of neglect, of loneliness, the ache of loss that had shaped me. Each memory was a weapon, a key, and a chain. The entity twisted them, turning my past into a labyrinth I could barely navigate. I relived the cold nights alone, the unanswered cries, the desperate search for warmth and safety. The boundaries between what was real and what was conjured blurred, until I could no longer tell if I was standing in the school or trapped inside my own fractured mind. Yet, even as the shadows closed in, a fragile flame flickered within me, hope, stubborn and defiant. I clung to it, drawing strength from the memories of kindness and courage I had witnessed in others, from the faint but persistent light of empathy and determination. With trembling hands, I reached into the darkness, refusing to be consumed. The entity recoiled, its form writhing in rage and desperation, but I held fast. I whispered back, not with words but with the fierce will to survive and to protect those yet to come. The crimson staircase seemed to pulse in response, the glow dimming, the shadows retreating, if only for a moment. I knew this battle was far from over, but I had taken the first step toward breaking the cycle. The entity's lure was powerful, but not invincible. And as I stood there, heart pounding, breath ragged, I understood that the true horror was not just the staircase or the entity, but the memories and fears we carry within us. The childhoods lost and corrupted, the dreams turned crimson with pain. But I would fight, for myself, for my friends, for every vanished soul whose laughter still echoed faintly in the halls at dawn. The nightmare was far from over, but I was no longer alone in the dark. And with that, I stepped forward once more into the unknown, the staircase awaiting, its crimson depths promising both terror and revelation. The library was quiet, except for the low hum of the ancient radiator and the occasional rustle of pages from the few students who dared linger past curfew. I sat curled in a shadowed corner, the soft amber glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the pages of my journal. Yet my pen hovered uselessly above the paper. The words I wanted to inscribe tangled in my throat, drowned beneath the echo of laughter that drifted faintly through the thick stone walls. Laughter that did not belong to this world. Fear had woven itself into the fabric of our days and nights, fracturing the bonds that had once kept us tethered. Marcus, whose rational mind had been my anchor, now seemed a man pulled between disbelief and terror. His sharp eyes, once so confident, darted nervously in the hallways, his posture taut as if bracing for some unseen blow. And then there was Leela, wild, fierce Leela, whose defiance was both a shield and a dagger. Her piercing gaze challenged everyone, but especially Marcus, whose skepticism she attacked with reckless abandon. That night, the tension snapped like a brittle twig Beniathfoot. It began with a whispered argument in the dormitory, words clipped and heavy with accusation. I could hear Marcus's voice, steady but strained. "We need to be careful, Leela. Recklessness won't save anyone." But Leela's retort came sharp and biting. "Careful? Cautious? How else do you expect us to fight this? Sitting on our hands, waiting to vanish like the others?" The air thickened with frustration as their voices rose, a tempest of emotion that left no room for reason. I wanted to intervene, to bridge the growing chasm, but my own fears rooted me to the spot. The fragile trust that once bound us now lay in shards at our feet. Later, wandering the deserted corridors, I felt the weight of the school's haunted past press down on me. Shadows stretched long and sinister. The cold stone walls seemed to close in, whispering secrets I was not sure I wanted to hear. Memories of Nina, of Leela's reckless climb, of the vanished students flickered like ghostly flames, stoking the raw ache of loss and the gnawing fear that I might be next. In that oppressive silence, I wrestled with my guilt for not protecting them, for the secrets I kept locked away in the pages of my journal. Yet, amid the darkness, a fragile flame of resolve flickered. I could not let the fear win. Days later, Marcus approached me quietly in the empty courtyard, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the cracked stone. His eyes held a vulnerability I had rarely seen. "Evelyn," he began, voice low, "I'm sorry for how I've been, for doubting you, and for the harsh words. I'm scared too, maybe more than I let on." The apology, tentative and genuine, thawed some of the ice that had built between us. In that silence, there was a moment, brief and precious, where hope whispered that perhaps we could mend what the shadows sought to destroy. But the crimson staircase still awaited, its dark promise lingering just beyond the veil of midnight. And I knew that if we were to survive, we would need to confront not just the horrors it concealed, but the fractures within ourselves. The night stretched ahead, heavy with dread and dread's twin, determination. The bonds that held us together might be cracked, but they were not yet broken. And I, for one, was not ready to let the darkness win. As I closed my journal and looked once more toward the window where the first hints of night crept, I felt the quiet pulse of the staircase's call. The battle was far from over, but I was ready to face it, no matter the cost. A whisper of laughter echoed faintly in the distance, a chilling reminder that time was running out, and I had to choose: heal the fractured bonds or fall alone into the crimson abyss. The choice was mine, and the night was waiting. Dawn spilled its pale light through the narrow windows of the boarding school, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers along the cold stone walls. The corridors were silent, except for an unsettling sound that seemed to ripple through the air, threading itself into the stillness. Laughter, it was faint at first, distant and childlike, yet unmistakably real. Evelyn Harper pressed her back against the rough plaster of the hallway, her breath shallow, eyes wide as the haunting echoes danced just beyond earshot. The laughter was familiar, yet impossible, an eerie reminder of those who had vanished, swallowed whole by the spectral staircase that emerged only after midnight. Her heart pounded in her chest, a tumultuous storm of fear and sorrow battling within her. The laughter was a cruel melody, carrying both the innocence of childhood and the sinister weight of loss. Each note seemed to claw at the edges of her sanity, blurring the line between memory and nightmare. She could almost see their faces, Nina, Leela, others lost to that crimson abyss, their laughter a ghostly tether dragging her closer to the edge of despair. In the dim light of the common room, Evelyn sat opposite Marcus Hale and Leela Chen, their faces etched with exhaustion and unease. The laughter, now faint but persistent, slipped through the cracked walls, infiltrating their conversation like a spectral presence. Marcus's skepticism had waned over time, replaced by a grim resolve, while Leela's rebellious fire flickered with a mix of defiance and fear. "It's like they're still here," Marcus murmured, voice tight, "but it's also like they're trapped somewhere we can't reach." Leela's eyes flashed with frustration. "We can't just wait for them to come back. We need to fight this, whatever it is." Evelyn nodded slowly, gripping the edge of the wooden table until her knuckles whitened. The laughter echoed again, a chilling reminder that time was slipping away, that each dawn marked another lost soul's passage into silence. Later, alone in her room, Evelyn lit a candle and opened her journal, the flickering flame casting trembling shadows on the walls. Her pen hovered over the pages, but the laughter grew louder, threading through her thoughts, conjuring memories of happier times now stained by fear. Faces smiled, frozen in moments of joy before the darkness swallowed them whole. She shivered, the fragile boundary between past and present dissolving in the dim glow. Outside her window, the first rays of sun painted the courtyard gold, But Evelyn's gaze was drawn to the shadow near the stairwell, a shifting form bathed in blood-red darkness, a childlike silhouette that melted into the morning mist. The laughter followed, wrapping around her like a cold embrace, a reminder that the nightmare was far from over. Caught between hope and despair, Evelyn realized that the echoes were more than just sounds. They were a call, a warning, and a challenge. To save her friends, to break the cycle, she would have to face the staircase again and the entity that waited within. Her breath hitched as the final notes of laughter faded into silence, leaving her alone with the weight of what was to come. The crimson staircase beckoned, its mystery deepening, its hunger insatiable, and Evelyn knew that the next step she took could change everything or end it all. The dawn's light trembled on the horizon, fragile and fleeting. So too was the hope that flickered within her, a flame that might yet burn through the darkness. But to reach it, she would have to descend deeper into the shadows than ever before. The dormitory was unusually silent that night, the kind of silence that weighed heavily on the chest, pressing down with an almost physical force. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, the thin blanket tangled around my legs, hands clenched tightly on the worn leather cover of my journal. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second dragging me closer to the hour when the staircase would appear. Midnight, the time when the school's ancient curse would once again manifest in its most sinister form. I stared at the dark window, the moonlight casting pale slivers of silver across the floor, but it was not the moon that occupied my thoughts. It was the staircase, the cruel, crimson serpent coiling its way upward from the depths of the unknown. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, chilling and childlike yet twisted with something unholy, ringing through the halls. Nina's laughter, Leela's laughter, the laughter of those who had vanished, swallowed by the darkness. My heart pounded fiercely, thrumming against my ribs like a frantic drum. Fear gnawed at the edges of my mind, but beneath it all, a stubborn ember of determination burned. I had to face it. I had to understand it. For the sake of those lost, and for my own fractured soul. A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. The door creaked open, and Marcus stepped inside, his usually confident demeanor tempered by something I had never seen before, concern. "Evelyn," he said quietly, closing the door behind him, "I know you have to do this, but I'm worried. It's not just some ghost story. This thing, it's real and dangerous." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know. But if I don't confront it, nothing will change. It will keep taking more of us. I can't stand by anymore." Marcus hesitated, then moved closer, lowering his voice. "Just be careful, and if things go wrong, you have to get out. Promise me." I managed a small, grim smile. "I promise." He lingered a moment longer, then turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Mr. Whittaker wanted to see you. Said it was important." The caretaker's warnings had always been cryptic, his eyes shadowed with memories he refused to share openly. I wondered what new piece of the puzzle he might reveal tonight. I found Mr. Whittaker in the dim light of the main hallway. His face was more lined than usual, and the usual stoic mask was pierced by an urgency I hadn't seen before. "Evelyn," he said, voice low and gravelly, "you're about to cross a threshold that few ever return from, the staircase. It's not just a passage, it's a trap, a prison forged from pain and broken childhoods. It feeds on innocence, and it will show you your deepest fears." I swallowed hard, meeting his gaze. "How do I fight something like that?" He shook his head slowly. "You don't fight it with strength alone. You need to hold on to what makes you human, hope, memory, love. But be warned, it will try to turn those against you." His words settled over me like a shroud. I nodded, feeling the weight of the coming ordeal settle on my shoulders. The school clock began its slow toll toward midnight. I stood in the corridor where the staircase was said to emerge, the cold stone floor beneath my feet grounding me in the present. The air was thick and heavy, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then, as the final stroke of midnight echoed through the halls, a crimson glow seeped from the floorboards, coalescing into the shape of the staircase. Each step gleamed wetly, dark red like fresh blood, spiraling upward into the darkness above. The laughter rose again, soft and seductive, laced with menace. I took a deep breath, steadying the trembling of my hands. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to hide, to deny this nightmare. But I stepped forward, crossing the threshold where light and shadow blurred, where innocence and horror entwined. The staircase greeted me with a cold, unyielding presence. The air grew colder still, and the laughter twisted into a chorus of whispers, beckoning me upward. With each step, memories surfaced, childhood moments fractured by pain and neglect, faces I had tried to forget, fears I had buried deep. Yet beneath the terror, a fragile flame of hope burned. I clung to it fiercely, like a lifeline in the encroaching darkness. As I ascended, the corridor behind me faded into shadow, and the world I knew slipped away. Ahead lay the unknown, the nightmare realm where the crimson entity awaited. The staircase stretched endlessly, each step a test of will, each moment a battle against despair. But I would not turn back, not now, not after all that had been lost. Because some nightmares must be faced to be defeated, and some stairs must be climbed to reach the light beyond. The crimson steps beneath my feet pulsed with an unnatural warmth, alive in a way that twisted my sense of reality. As I lifted my foot to the next stair, the world around me began to unravel. The familiar stone walls of the school faded, melting into a storm of swirling shadows and fractured memories. The air grew thick, heavy with whispers and the faint scent of something metallic, like rusted blood. I was no longer in the school, but suspended within a realm caught between nightmare and memory, a place where the past bled into the present. Each step echoed hollowly, but the sound was distorted, reverberating as if swallowed by an unseen void. The crimson staircase stretched endlessly upward and downward, its edges blurring and shimmering like a mirage. I felt the creeping weight of unseen eyes watching me, and then I saw them, spectral children, drifting silently through the shadows. Their forms were translucent, flickering like candlelight caught in a breeze. Their eyes were hollow pits, black and bottomless, yet filled with an aching sorrow that pulled at my heart. One reached out a transparent hand, fingers trembling as if seeking to grasp something lost. Their whispers curled around me, a chorus of broken promises and forgotten dreams. "Stay with us," they murmured, voices like the rustling of dry leaves. I wanted to scream, to flee, but my feet were rooted, caught in the gravity of their despair. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a form more solid and terrible. The crimson entity emerged, a shifting mass of blood-red darkness, its shape flickering between monstrous and childlike. Its eyes, burning coals of malevolence, fixed on me as it smiled with a twisted innocence. "You came," it said, voice thick with mockery and warmth. "You carry the scars of your past just like the others." Visions flooded my mind, fragments of my childhood broken and distorted. Faces I tried to forget twisted into grotesque parodies, laughter turning to screams. The entity fed on my fear, twisting it into a cage I could barely escape. "You belong here," it whispered, "a lost child in a world that devours hope." But within the darkness, a small light flickered, a fragile flame burning against the night. I reached toward it, feeling a surge of defiance swell inside me. The flame grew, illuminating the nightmare realm with a pale glow. Though my limbs trembled and terror gnawed at my resolve, I clenched my fists and faced the entity with a newfound strength. This was the moment where fear met courage, where the fragile hope of a broken girl stood against the consuming abyss. "I am not yours," I said, voice steady despite the quiver beneath. "I will break this cycle. I will save those lost to you." The entity recoiled, a screech piercing the air as the shadows writhed and fractured. The staircase behind me began to glow with a fierce red light, the walls of the nightmare realm trembling as the battle for my soul, and the souls of all who vanished, raged on. In that moment, the line between nightmare and reality blurred to nothing, and I understood that this fight was not just for survival, but for the very essence of innocence itself. As the flames of hope flickered stronger, I steeled myself for the long struggle ahead. The crimson staircase was no longer just a path to darkness. It was the battleground where I would face my deepest fears and the malevolent force that had haunted the school for generations. I took a deep breath, the echo of laughter fading behind me, and stepped forward into the unknown, ready to confront the nightmare that awaited. The nightmarish realm was alive and breathing, a twisted reflection of the boarding school's hidden horrors. Every corner held a memory warped by despair. Every shadow bore the weight of lost childhoods. But as I moved deeper within the crimson abyss, I realized that the darkness could be challenged, that the fragile flame of hope was not yet extinguished. And with that thought, I dared to hope, for myself, for my friends, and for all the innocent souls trapped within the endless spiral of the staircase. The nightmare realm stretched infinitely around me, a swirling tempest of crimson mist and shadow that clung to my skin like cold sweat. The metallic scent of blood hung thick in the air, mingling with faint echoes, children's laughter warped and twisted into something far darker, a chorus of innocence lost and pain unspoken. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, as if the ground beneath me was soaked in sorrow. From the depths of the swirling haze, a figure began to take form. The crimson entity emerged, its shape ever-shifting, bathed in blood-red shadows that writhed and pulsed with a life of their own. Its edges blurred and flickered, sometimes resolving into the distorted silhouettes of children, faces pale and hollow-eyed, frozen in silent screams or pleading gazes that pierced my heart. "Why do you come here, Evelyn?" The voice was a whisper, yet it echoed with the weight of countless lost souls. It was both childlike and monstrous, a cacophony of innocence corrupted. I swallowed my fear, gripping my journal tightly in one hand, the only tether to my reality. "I want to understand, to know what you are, why you take them, why you haunt this place." The entity's tendrils of shadow reached toward me, pulsing with a crimson light that seeped into my skin, cold and intoxicating. Images flooded my mind. The halls of the boarding school as they once were, vibrant with the laughter and dreams of children. Then, the darkness, disappearances, whispered rumors, families torn apart by grief. Memories I had only glimpsed in fragments now coalesced into a tapestry of pain and loss. Each vanished student, each broken home, fed the entity's power. It was not merely a malevolent force, but a living manifestation of the collective trauma that had festered within these walls for decades. The crimson staircase was its gateway, a trap woven from fear and desire, luring the innocent to feed its endless hunger. I staggered back, the weight of revelation pressing down on me. "You're all of them, the pain, the fear, the sadness. You're the darkness born from their suffering." The entity's form shuddered, faces flickering like fading memories. "I am what remains when innocence is devoured. I am the echo of forgotten cries." A shiver ran down my spine as I realized the terrible truth. To defeat it, I could not merely fight. I had to reach through the darkness, to touch the fragile flame of hope still burning within the shattered remains of these lost souls. "I won't let you keep taking them," I whispered, voice trembling but steady. "There has to be another way, one that breaks this cycle of loss." For a moment, silence hung between us, a fragile truce in the heart of the nightmare. Then, the entity pulsed, a wave of crimson energy washing over me, testing the boundaries of my courage. But I stood firm, the memories of my own childhood, marked by neglect and longing, fueling my resolve. I would not let this place destroy any more innocence, not if I could help it. The nightmare realm seemed to hold its breath, the swirling mist stilling as the first flicker of understanding passed between us. The battle was far from over, but this revelation, this unmasking of the entity's true nature, was the key to breaking the cycle. As the crimson shadows writhed and the echoes of laughter faded into a haunting silence, I knew the path ahead would demand everything I had, and more. But beneath the crushing weight of dread, a fragile flame of hope still flickered, refusing to be extinguished. And I would fight to keep it alive. The air around me thickened, a suffocating veil of darkness that seemed to pulse with each beat of my heart. I found myself standing in a vast void, endless and cavernous. The walls were not solid, but composed of swirling crimson mist and shadows that writhed like living things, whispering faint echoes of laughter that sent chills crawling across my skin. My breath came out in ragged clouds, visible in the icy air, and every sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence that pressed against my eardrums like a weight. In the center of this nightmare realm, I felt the fragile flame of hope flicker weakly within me, a small ember barely holding back the encroaching darkness. It was as if every childhood memory I had ever harbored, every moment of joy, every stolen laugh, every secret shared in the safety of friendship, had been distilled into this single, trembling light. Clutching it tightly, I knew this was my only weapon against what awaited me. Then, from the shadows, the entity emerged. The crimson entity, a shifting mass of blood-red shadows and grotesque shapes, its form never stable, never kind. For a moment, it took the shape of a child, a twisted, distorted silhouette with eyes that burned like molten rubies. Its gaze bore into me, a hunger so profound it seemed to tear at the edges of my soul. "You cannot save them," it hissed, its voice the echo of 1,000 lost whispers, "nor yourself. This place is your fate." I felt the darkness surge forward, tendrils of shadow reaching for me, curling like smoke to snuff out my fragile light. Panic flared within me, the old fears clawing back, the loneliness, the guilt, the helplessness that had shadowed my every step since I arrived here. I almost let go, almost let the flame die. But then I remembered Nina's laughter, faint and haunting as it was, and Leela's reckless spirit burning bright even now in that remorseless place. I thought of Marcus, his steady presence, his growing belief in the impossible. And most of all, I thought of my own childhood, the innocence I had lost but still carried somewhere deep inside. With a trembling hand, I cupped the flame tighter, its warmth seeping into my palm, its light growing stronger despite the darkness. "I refuse to be afraid," I whispered, voice cracking but fierce. "I refuse to let you win." The entity recoiled as if struck, its form flickering wildly. Shadows screamed and writhed, but the flame pulsed brighter, casting away the crimson haze, revealing glimpses of a world beyond this nightmare. I felt a surge of strength, fragile but real, coursing through me. "You feed on fear," I said, voice rising, "but I have something you cannot consume: hope." The crimson entity howled, a sound that shattered the silence into shards of despair. It lunged again, faster this time, shadows coiling like serpents, seeking to extinguish my light. I held my ground, heart pounding, tears streaming down my face as I stared into the abyss. In that moment, the fragile flame became a beacon. It flickered, danced, and then burned steadily, a defiant blaze against the consuming dark. I was alone, yes, but not powerless. Not yet. As the entity's form began to unravel, losing coherence and strength, I took a step forward, then another, each one a battle one. The nightmares and memories twisted around me, but I would not cower. I would fight for the lost laughter, for the vanished friends, for the innocence stolen by this cursed place. Even as the darkness threatened to swallow me whole, I clung to the fragile flame, a fragile flame that, against all odds, refused to die. But the battle was far from over, and as the shadows retreated, I knew the choices ahead would demand everything I had, and more. The crimson entity's howl faded into a low growl, promising that this confrontation was only the beginning. I exhaled slowly, the flame steady in my palm, and prepared to face whatever came next. Because some lights, however fragile, are worth fighting for, and I was determined to keep mine burning. The air around me thrummed with a suffocating weight as the crimson staircase loomed before me, each step seeming to pulse with a life of its own. The shadows writhed, shifting between the tangible and the spectral, as though the very air was soaked in some ancient, malevolent sorrow. I clenched my fists, the tremor in my fingers betraying the storm of emotions raging within me: fear, anger, desperation, and beneath it all, a flicker of something steadier: resolve. This was the moment I had dreaded and desired in equal measure. To ascend once more into the nightmare realm, to confront the entity that had haunted our halls and stolen our friends. But this time, I was not the frightened newcomer, nor the curious observer. I was a seeker of truth, bearing the weight of memories and hopes intertwined. The laughter echoed again, distant but unmistakable, a cruel reminder of those who had vanished before me. Yet this time, I refused to let it unnerve me. I breathed deeply, feeling the cold air against my skin, grounding myself in the present even as the shadows beckoned. As I stepped onto the first crimson stair, The world around me dissolved into a kaleidoscope of nightmarish visions. Twisted corridors lined with spectral children, whose eyes gleamed with sorrow and longing. The entity awaited, its form flickering between a swirling mass of blood-red shadows and the distorted silhouette of a child. It was a grotesque mimicry of innocence, a manifestation of every lost hope and forgotten pain entwined within the school's cursed history. I hesitated briefly, memories flooding my mind. The neglected afternoons of my childhood, the aching loneliness, the whispered secrets of the staircase, Nina's vanished smile, Leela's reckless defiance, Marcus's unwavering presence. All these threads wove together, binding me to this place, to this moment. Why do you resist? The entity's voice was a haunting melody, both inviting and threatening, echoing inside my mind rather than through the air. Your fear feeds me. Your despair sustains me. I swallowed hard, steadying my voice. I am not your prey. I see your hunger and I see the pain beneath it. You are not just darkness. You are the echoes of forgotten children, the shadows of innocence lost. But I will not let you consume us any longer. For a heartbeat, the entity recoiled, its form flickering uncertainly. The air pulsed with a strange energy, as if my words had pried open a fragile seam in the nightmare. Compassion, it whispered, a note of disbelief threading through the menace. You offer what I cannot have. Perhaps, I said, stepping closer, but I offer something stronger than fear. I offer understanding. The twisted childlike silhouette extended a trembling hand, and instinctively I reached out to meet it. The shadows writhed violently, but instead of resistance, there was a subtle shift, a flicker of recognition, as if within the monstrous form, a spark of the lost souls long trapped flickered to life. Suddenly, the nightmare realm convulsed. Dark tendrils lashed out, and the ground beneath me trembled, but I felt a firm hand grasp mine. Marcus stood beside me, his skeptical eyes now wide with a mixture of fear and fierce loyalty. I'm here, he said, his voice steadying the chaos. We fight this together. With his presence anchoring me, I felt the fragile flame of hope ignite fully. The entity's power faltered, the crimson shadows splintering like shattered glass. The staircase groaned, cracks spiderwebbing across each step, shards of blood-red light dissolving into the void. The haunting laughter that had once echoed endlessly began to fade, replaced by a silence so profound it was almost a balm. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of years of fear and loss lift just slightly. But even as the nightmare dissolved, I knew the scars remained, the memories, the pain, the fragile boundary between childhood wonder and nightmare. Yet in this moment, we had broken the cycle. For the first time, the crimson staircase was no longer a prison, but a fading shadow. As Marcus and I made our way back to the waking world, the dawn light filtering through the shattered windows felt warmer, less threatening. The school breathed differently now, as if it too had been exorcised of its darkest demons. Still, I carried the echo of the entity's final whispered words. You may have won this battle, but the shadows linger. And I knew the fight was not over, not entirely. But armed with empathy, courage, and the bonds forged in darkness, I was ready to face whatever came next. The crimson staircase was breaking free from the endless cycle of fear, and perhaps, just perhaps, breaking free for us all. I paused at the threshold, looking back one last time. The shadows flickered, a silent promise that the past would always haunt, but that hope, fragile and fierce, could endure. And with that, I stepped forward into the dawn. I emerged from the nightmare like a drowning soul breaking the surface, gasping for breath, but alive. The oppressive darkness that had clung to me like a shroud began to dissolve as the first pale light of dawn crept through the cracked windows of the old boarding school. The crimson staircase, that spectral tormentor, was gone. The air felt different, lighter, yet carrying the weight of all that had transpired. My legs trembled beneath me as I took hesitant steps forward, each echo in the silent hallway a reminder of how quiet the school had become. There was no laughter now, no eerie echoes that had haunted every morning since Nina first vanished, just silence and the lingering scent of dust and forgotten memories. Marcus was waiting at the foot of the stairs, his eyes sharp yet softened by concern. When I reached him, his hand reached out instinctively, steadying me. The touch was grounding, a tether to reality after the surreal horrors I had endured. "You made it," he said quietly, voice thick with relief and something unspoken shared pain, perhaps. I nodded, unable to speak, the weight of what I'd faced still pressing heavily on my chest. We stood there for a long moment, two survivors in a place that had swallowed so many before us. The school was still, but the scars were visible. Walls bore faint stains where shadows had clung. The air held a chill that no sunlight could fully chase away. Yet, in that silence, I felt the fragile stirrings of hope. The entity's grip had been broken, its hunger momentarily sated or ended. The crimson dreams that had plagued us, the twisted echoes of childhood innocence corrupted, no longer bled into our waking lives. I walked the halls, each step a journey through the shadows of the past. I passed the spot where the staircase once materialized, a void so profound it felt like the absence of something vital. No longer a portal to despair, but a wound healing. The laughter that had echoed at dawn was gone, leaving a hollow ache in its place. I wondered about the friends we'd lost, about the countless children who had vanished before us, their fates forever entwined with the darkness that had haunted these halls. Marcus joined me as I paused by a window overlooking the grounds. The morning sun cast long, gentle shadows across the courtyard, painting the world in hues of gold and amber. It was beautiful and cruel all at once, a reminder that life continued, indifferent to the pain beneath. I thought of my own fractured childhood, the neglect and loss that had driven me here to this place of nightmares and revelations. Somehow surviving meant carrying those scars forward, not erasing them. "What now?" Marcus asked softly, breaking the silence. I swallowed hard, the taste of dust and tears lingering on my tongue. "We remember," I said finally. "We tell our story, we make sure this never happens again." He nodded, eyes steady. "Together." The crimson staircase was gone, but the shadows it cast remained. And in those shadows, we would find the strength to heal, to reclaim the innocence stolen from us and from so many before. The nightmare was over, but the journey had only just begun. As I closed my eyes, a final echo stirred in the depths of my mind, not laughter, but a whisper of promise. The past would not be forgotten, but neither would it define us. We would rise from the ashes of fear, fragile yet unbroken, ready to face whatever dawn awaited beyond the shadows. The morning sun filtered through the tall, narrow windows of the boarding school, casting long, pale beams across the worn stone floors. The halls, once echoing with the sinister laughter that haunted the night, now held a fragile quietude. It was a silence that was both welcome and unsettling, a reminder of what had been lost and what might never be fully regained. I moved slowly through the corridors, my footsteps soft against the cold floor. The walls, once vibrant with the echoes of childhood, both innocent and corrupted, now seemed to sag under the weight of memories too heavy to bear. The peeling paint and cracks in the plaster told stories of neglect and time, but beneath them lurked something darker, a stain no amount of sunlight could erase. My journal was tucked under my arm, its pages worn and heavy with the weight of my truth. Each entry was a fragment of a past that refused to be forgotten, a chronicle of fear, hope, and the desperate search for meaning in a place where innocence was devoured by shadows. The crimson staircase was gone, vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared, but its mark remained etched into the very fabric of the school and my soul. In the library, I found a quiet corner bathed in the soft glow of afternoon light. The familiar scent of aged paper and dust surrounded me as I opened my journal. My fingers trembled slightly as I traced the inked words, each line a testament to the terror and resolve that had shaped my journey. The memories surged, vivid and raw, the laughter of those lost, the chilling presence of the crimson entity, and the fragile flame of hope that had burned within me even in the darkest moments. Marcus appeared, his silhouette framed in the doorway. His sharp eyes softened as he approached, the skepticism that once defined him replaced by a cautious understanding. We exchanged no words at first, only the silent acknowledgement of what we had endured. Outside, the breeze whispered through the branches of the old oak tree, its leaves rustling like a quiet symphony of renewal and remembrance. "It's strange," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. "How the school feels different now. Like it's breathing again, but still holding its breath." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. "It's healing, but the scars, they don't just disappear." "Not completely." He looked out toward the horizon, where the sun began to dip behind distant hills. "Maybe that's the way it has to be, to remember but not be trapped by the past." The truth in his voice resonated deeply. The journey had changed us all, marked us with invisible wounds that time alone could not mend. Yet within that shared pain was a burgeoning strength, a resolve to protect what innocence remained from being swallowed by darkness. From a distance, I noticed Mr. Whittaker standing near the entrance, his weathered face etched with lines of sorrow and relief. For years, he had carried the burden of secrets, guarding the school and its hidden terrors with a quiet vigilance. Now, as the shadows retreated, his posture seemed lighter, though his eyes still held the weight of untold stories. I approached him cautiously. "Do you think it's really over?" He met my gaze, the corners of his mouth twitching into a faint, weary smile. "Some shadows never fully fade, Evelyn, but with the light, they lose their power. You've done what many couldn't." His words were both a comfort and a warning. The past was a specter that would linger, but it need not define the future. As evening settled, I returned to my room, the journal open on my desk. Outside, the school hummed softly with the tentative rhythms of life returning. Students' voices carried on the wind, footsteps echoing in the halls, laughter that was genuine and free. Yet beneath it all, the memory of the crimson staircase and its haunting echoes remained, a silent guardian of the fragile boundary between childhood wonder and nightmare. The scars we bore were not just personal, they were collective, woven into the identity of the school itself. But in facing the darkness, we had kindled a fragile flame of hope, a light to guide those who would come after us. And though the laughter at dawn had faded, the echoes whispered still, reminding me that some shadows would always linger, waiting, not to consume, but to be remembered. I closed my journal, the weight of the past settling into a quiet resolve. The journey was far from over, not for me, not for the school, and not for the fragile innocence that still flickered within these ancient walls. But for the first time in a long while, I dared to believe that healing was possible. Outside, the night deepened, stars shimmering like distant promises. And somewhere, beyond the veil of memory and darkness, the crimson staircase rested, silent, dormant, waiting for a new dawn. The dawn crept slowly through the tall, ancient windows of the boarding school's library, casting soft, red streaks of light that seemed to dance like flames across the worn wooden floors. I sat alone at one of the long tables, my journal spread open before me, the pages worn from nights of pouring my thoughts and fears into ink. Outside, the world was waking, but inside this sanctuary of memories and secrets, time felt suspended, fragile as a spider's web trembling in the morning breeze. I paused, my pen hovering above the page, the weight of all that had transpired pressing heavily on my chest. The crimson staircase was gone, vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. The endless echoes of laughter that once haunted the halls had quieted, replaced by the gentle murmur of life, returning to a place long shrouded in dread. But despite this fragile peace, I knew the scars it left behind would never fully fade. Turning to a fresh page, I began to write again, my hand steady now, each word a stitch mending the ragged edges of my soul. This journal was no longer just my refuge. It was a testament to those who never returned, a beacon for those who might one day walk these halls and face the darkness anew. I wrote of the staircase's insidious allure, of childhood innocence twisted by shadows, and of the courage it took to confront what lay beyond the veil. As I wrote, the door creaked softly, and Marcus stepped inside, his tall frame silhouetted by the gentle morning light. His eyes met mine, a flicker of a smile breaking through the exhaustion that clouded them. "Morning, Evelyn," he said quietly, sliding into the seat beside me. "You look like you've been at it all night." I closed the journal gently, meeting his gaze. "It's important," I said. "If this is to end, we have to remember, we have to warn others." He nodded, his usual skepticism tempered by the shared horrors we'd faced. "I never thought I'd believe in any of it," he admitted, "but now I know some things don't fit into neat boxes. We have to be ready, just in case." The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Leela appeared, her dark eyes bright with a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. She paused at the threshold, then joined us without a word, the unspoken bond between us stronger than ever. Together, we sat in the quiet library, three survivors bound by trauma and the fragile hope of healing. Outside, the school was waking to a new day. The oppressive shadows that had clung to its walls like a living thing were retreating, replaced by the gentle warmth of sunlight. Students wandered through the halls with tentative smiles, their laughter genuine and free from the haunting echoes that had once marked every dawn. It was a beginning, delicate, uncertain, but real. Yet, as I watched the light spill over the familiar, yet forever changed surroundings, I felt the weight of the past pressing against the present. The crimson stains on my journal's cover were a silent reminder that some wounds run deep, and some shadows never fully disappear. But in that moment, as the first true dawn after the nightmare's end bathed us all in a hopeful glow, I made a silent promise to carry the memories, the warnings, and the truth forward, to keep the flame of innocence alive, even when darkness threatened to snuff it out. The new dawn was fragile, but it was ours, and for the first time in a long time, I believed we might just be able to hold on to it. As the light grew stronger, I knew the journey wasn't over. The shadows lingered, waiting in the corners of memory and the quiet spaces between heartbeats. But together, we would face whatever came next, because we had survived, because we still had each other, and because sometimes, even in the darkest places, hope was the most powerful force of all. I glanced once more at my journal before closing it, the worn leather cover soft beneath my fingers. The crimson stains were faint now, like echoes of a nightmare fading into the dawn. But the story was written and the warning clear. This was not just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of a new story, one where the past was never forgotten, but where the future held the promise of light. And as I stood, feeling the weight of that promise settle over me, I knew that whatever shadows might come, we would meet them not with fear, but with courage. Because we had learned the truth, and now we would write the future. But even as the sun climbed higher, a whisper lingered in the air, a faint, almost imperceptible echo. A reminder that some shadows never fully fade, that the Crimson Staircase's story was woven into the very fabric of this place, and into the hearts of those who dared to remember. And so, with a steady breath, I stepped into the new dawn, ready to face whatever awaited with open eyes and an unbroken spirit. The end was only the beginning. The first light of dawn crept softly through the tall, arched windows of the ancient boarding school, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the cold, polished floors. The Crimson Staircase, once a spectral presence that haunted the midnight hours, was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. Yet, in the stillness of the early morning, a faint, distant laughter echoed through the corridors, fragile and fleeting, like a whisper carried on a breeze. I stood alone in the hallway where the staircase had appeared, my breath visible in the crisp air, heart heavy with the weight of all that had passed. The silence felt unnatural, oppressive even, as if the school itself was holding its breath. My fingers tightened around the leather strap of my satchel, the journal inside still filled with the record of our ordeal. Each page bore witness to the horrors we had faced, the friends we had lost, and the terrifying truths we had uncovered. Yet now, faced with the quiet aftermath, I found myself grappling with a strange mix of relief and lingering dread. The staircase was gone, yes, but its absence only served to remind me of the fragile boundary between childhood wonder and nightmare, a boundary blurred and broken by the crimson shadows that had claimed so many. I turned away from the empty space, the soft golden light bathing the walls in a gentle glow. Footsteps approached, and soon Marcus and Leela joined me, their faces etched with exhaustion but also a quiet resolve. We moved together through the halls to the common room, where the worn furniture and faded tapestries offered a semblance of comfort amidst the lingering darkness. "It's really over," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the weariness in his eyes. "The staircase won't return. We broke the cycle." Leela nodded, though her gaze remained distant. "We may have stopped it, but the scars, they don't just disappear." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken grief filling the space between us. Memories of Nina, Leela herself, and the others who had vanished haunted the edges of my thoughts. Their laughter, once chilling and spectral, now felt like a bittersweet reminder of innocence lost and the darkness we had confronted. "We have to make sure no one else falls into that trap," I said, voice trembling but firm. "Our story has to be told, the school, it needs to be vigilant." Marcus reached out, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We'll do it together. No more secrets, no more silence." As dusk gave way to night, I found myself alone once more, seated at my desk by the flickering candlelight. My journal lay open before me, the pages worn and ink-stained. With trembling hands, I began to write the final entry, capturing the truth of what we had endured and the fragile hope that now flickered within me like a fragile flame. Outside, the shadows danced on the walls like ghostly children caught between worlds, reminders of the lingering presence of the crimson entity. Though defeated, it had not been destroyed. Its distorted childlike silhouette flickered in the corner of my vision, a haunting echo of the darkness that had fed on our fears and suppressed memories. As I closed the journal, the last ember of the candle guttered and went out, leaving me in darkness. The silence was complete, yet I knew deep down that the echoes of the past would never fully fade. They would linger in the halls, in our hearts, and in the stories we dared to tell. Standing by the window, I gazed out into the mist that cloaked the school grounds. The morning air was crisp, carrying with it the faintest trace of that eerie laughter, delicate and distant, like a memory slipping just beyond reach. I swallowed a lump in my throat, feeling the weight of all we had lost and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The crimson staircase was gone. The cycle of disappearances was broken. But the shadows, the echoes, the fragile boundary between childhood wonder and nightmare, those remained, silent and watchful. And so, with a steadying breath, I made a silent vow. To guard that boundary, to protect those who would come after me, and to remember the children whose laughter still haunted these halls. For some shadows, I realized, never truly fade. They only wait. The end was not a conclusion, but a beginning, a fragile flame flickering defiantly against the darkness that sought to consume it. And as the first rays of a new dawn spilled into the world, I stepped forward, ready to face whatever echoes remained.